Okay, nearing the end. On the triangle pieces, you remember I marked them all with wash away marker, and on the sides here, I only did a line that I'll follow rather than marking all the feathers. And I don't know if these are showing on camera, but that's sort of where I'm headed with this. So just a little bit left to go, and then I will what I like to do on quilts lately is after I get the major quilting done, all the center, everything, I wash it. Then I'll trim and square up as needed and then bind it. And the reason I do that is sometimes it does turn out that it's not as square and straight as you thought it was. And it's easier to tell, I find, after it's been washed. So that's what I'm going to do. I will finish the quilting and throw it in the wash, put it in the dryer, then finish it off. One of the things that I thought I would mention, and I do this at the risk of offending people. In the view from the video, when you look at this particular machine, I can see how it might look like it's a featherweight. And of course it's not. Featherweight is a good machine. No question about it, it's a good machine. I would never have one. They're just too small to do anything with. If you only want it for piecing, I think it's okay. If you're a person who does quilting retreats and workshops and things where you need a machine to take with you, perfect for that. But I have no use for one. It's just, like I said, just too small. I want the biggest machine I can get, and I want it to be my preference is, of course, to be one that can go in a Treadel. Featherweight doesn't fit either of those requirements. So I'll never buy one. I'm sure it would work, but only for small projects. I really don't think it would be practical to try and quilt a full-size quilt in such a little machine. This is probably twice the size of a featherweight. There's there's about 8.5 inches between the needle and the column on this machine. Featherweight would come to about here. So it makes a huge difference. Anyway. Nothing wrong with featherweights. Like I said, good machine. They do last forever. But boy, are they expensive. The last sewing machine I bought was $20. The cheapest that I've ever seen a functional featherweight was about $200. So I could get 10 other machines for the the same price. So anyway, that's my featherweight story, and I think they're a good machine for piecing, but I wouldn't try free motion quilting on one unless you're just into small projects. And for those, I assume it would work fine. So, as I said, this one is a Treadel machine. It was made by the Free Sewing Machine Company in Rockport, Illinois, outside of Chicago. And this one's from the 20s. And then a treadle base. They also had motors for these. This machine was available with a motor. But in the early days of motorized sewing machines, even though the motor was available, more often than not, people bought it without and stuck with a treadle. If you look at all the different machines that were available in early Sears catalogs, they had a much bigger selection of treadle than electric. But most of the machines were, it was exactly the same machine. The only difference is that it was had a motor attached, and it was in a different cable. Instead of being in a treadle, it was the power mechanism was the motor, so you didn't need the foot pedal. It was just a different cabinet. But the machine really was the same. I mentioned it last time, but it bears repeating. The place where you really need to worry about your speed the most, I find, is around these outside curves. And you'll have the tendency, at least I do, to want to really zip around that curve. But if you do, that's where you're going to get tension or thread problems that make your stitches look weird. And that's because you're going too fast. Now it feels weird, like you're actually going a lot slower in that part, but you're not. You might have to make yourself go slower around that portion. But if you were to look at the think of it as a straight line instead of a curve. If you were to take that long that seam, that stitch line, and open it up, you'd see that the distance from here to here is quite a bit longer than from here to here. So even though you're not traveling that far, because you're going around a curve, it's really a longer distance. So you can't go faster than the machine can make those stitches properly. hope that made sense. But anyway, whether that made sense or not, just take my advice. You'll get better stitches if you go slower around those curves. Everybody has their own style of, or at least it seems to me, most machine and long arm quilters have a little bit of their own way of making feathers. What I'm doing here is the way that seems to work best for me. There's nothing that says this is the right way. This is just my way. I find it works better for me than the kind where you just go over the top. But like I said, everyone's different, so do what works best for you. Practice a few different methods. What I would suggest before you started with the machine, just draw a few out on paper and pencil and figure out how it is that you can do one without picking up your pencil, the point of your pencil. Because essentially that's what you're going to be doing when you get it in the machine. You know, I could take a pencil and draw this by starting and drawing to a point and then stopping and then moving my pencil to a different spot, but you can't do that with the machine. So when you're trying to draw it, when you're practicing drawing it, draw and keep the point, you know, don't lift the point up off the pencil. Keep moving a continuous line as you would when you're stitching, and that's how you'll figure out and get the feeling for what you need to do with the machine to make it work. I didn't stay stitch the quilt top around the edges. A lot of people will do that. Put a finished stitch around the edge to keep it in place as part of the basting process. I don't do that, but when I get to the edges, sometimes I have to hold on really hard to keep it from pulling in. So I might have had an easier time with these edges if I had put a little stitching on that edges, and that might help me keep it squarer. But anyway, before I put it in the wash, I am going to run a line of stitching around the outside edge really close, just to sort of keep it from fraying apart too bad. Would be best to do that with a zigzag stitch, but this machine doesn't have one. Now I might switch to another machine and do that. But basically, this is the end of the machine quilting on this one, and it looks pretty good. So now it's time for wash, and then I'll show you binding after that. I'm going to use blue for the binding, and then it'll be done. So I finished the quilting, and in addition to that, I trimmed all the excess off the edges. And I'm ready to do the binding. This is the back. And I'm going to sew the binding to the back and then flip it over to the front and top stitch it down. So here is my binding, and it's 2.5-inch strips, and I'll start by sewing it on, cut edges together, and stitch it 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then it'll get folded over to the front and finished that way. So to do this, I've got a regular piecing foot in there. I'm going to start with, I'm going to leave a chunk of extra, starting about the middle of one side. Put the, because this extra bit here is going to be the part that is used in the joining of the two halves when I get there. So I want to start with the basic stitching down 1/4 of an inch. I'm using a basic presser foot from my Treadel, nothing special. You could certainly use a walking foot if you are so inclined. I just don't feel like it makes that big of a difference for me. So the important thing isn't really this. Will look kind of boring watching me do a bunch of straight stitching. So as soon as I get to the corner, I'll show you how to trim the corner for a miter, and then I'll come back after I get it all done. If you cut your fabric perfectly straight, you could sort of use the grid pattern on the gingham as your guide for a perfect stitch, but unfortunately mine is not cut perfectly. So, but as you know, if you've watched me for very much, you know that I'm not really that concerned about perfection. Now, we're getting close to the corner, and what we have to determine is where to stop. The way that I'm going to do that is just by simply folding the fabric. So if I fold this at a 45-degree angle so that it lines up with the edge, so the binding comes out like that. You see that? So make sure you've got it nice and neatly lined up there. But do you see that? So that lines up with the corner. You can then just give it a little bit of a finger press, and then when your needle hits the line, that's when you stop. And then if you want, you can sew off the corner. Yep, you got to put the foot down. And then turn over here. I'm going to fold it up and then back down. So it's straight across the top. I've kept that miter in, and now I'm going to start 1/4 of an inch down and keep sewing. I'm going to do that to all 4 corners, and then I'll show you how I would join that. So I'll be back. So I've got it to the point where I need to join the 2 ends of the binding together. Now the way that I do this is I'm going to sew the ends of these 2 pieces together. I don't like to measure, so I'm going to cut a little piece of this up and use that as my measuring device. So I need this end to be that much extra in width from the end there. So I'm going to use that piece, which is actually 2.5 inches. So if you really wanted, you could certainly get out a ruler and measure. But I've got this laid out, so I've got the end there, and then if I line this up with it, then put this on top, and I'll cut it exactly where that piece is, hopefully not cut through anything else. So now this one's that much longer than that one. And right sides together, corner to corner, stitch on the 45, and then I'll have a joined seam. Let me show you. Now, if I were a more careful person, I would probably pin this, but I'm not. I don't have any pins right here in front of me, so this is how I'm doing it. So okay, so this part has to get cut off, and then I can sew it back down straight across, and that finishes the whole edge. So after I do that, I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to press open the insides, the seam on the inside. I like to press open on the bindings, and then I'll fold it back over and press it, and then sew it back down. Now I don't have to go through all that pressing. I could probably just, in fact I think that's what I'll do. I'm just going to finger press it. But again, if you're an accurate type person, that may not be sufficient for you. You might need to, in order to feel good about it, you might need to take it to the iron and give it a quick hit with the iron. But the basic idea is there. Just remember to cut your binding overlap there at the end, the width of one unfolded width of binding, and then once you sew it together 45 degrees corner to corner, you get the fit should be exactly right. There's other ways to do that. I've seen specialty rulers and map formulas and all kinds of what I think are excessively complex ways to make that happen. But I think that's the easiest. Just use a chunk of the binding as a measuring guide and cut it off to that amount. And at least that's the easiest way I've found. Now, if I was going to sew this on by, if I was going to do hand binding, I would have done this exactly the same way, but I would have been sewing, doing this part on the front of the quilt, and then when I get to the, when I get that all done, then I would flip the binding to the back and then hand stitch it down. In this case, I'm going to machine top stitch it, so I'll do that from the front, and I'll show you that in a minute. So it's all sewed on around the edges, and I flipped it over, and now the next step is to fold that binding from the back over to the front, and we'll top stitch on top of that. Now, if it helps you, you certainly can put in a few pins, or you can use those handy little clip deals. So here at the corner, let me see if I can get a little closer. So at the corner, bring it up straight, right up to that, the way the seam goes the other way, and then bring that, and so that gives you this sort of a 45 across here, and then fold it back, and again, if it helps, you can pop a little pin in there. But do you see that, how that makes the mitered corner? And that's all there is to it. And the rest is, well, this becomes a little bit more challenging on this particular quilt because this old gingham fabric frays a lot. And so I end up with lots of threads sticking out everywhere. But aside from that, the stitching is really easy. This is just straight stitch. And the only challenge is to keep your stitch line in a relatively consistent place near the edge of the binding, just so that it looks neat. Top stitching is always a challenge for me in that you know, I seem to have no trouble making a perfect stitch until it's going to show, and then I always seem to stray offline a little bit. So you know, just take this slow and be patient so that your top stitching doesn't get too wonky. And oops, I'm losing my pins. So then you're just going to, with your needle down, pivot at the corner, and go along from there. I tend to only pin at the corners, and then the rest of the way down, I just kind of do it by hand as I go. But there's the finished corner, and I think it looks pretty good. What you can do, if you really want it to be perfect and flat, is hit a little bit of steam on that corner, or you could even do an invisible blind stitch in there to really hold it down, but I think it looks good. So I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll come back and show you the completed quilt. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. In the beginning video, I showed you how I did all the marking with the wash-away markers. Well, before I did the binding, after I finished all the quilting, I threw the whole machine in the washing machine, and I used warm water, gentle cycle, regular laundry type, what I would use on clothes, laundry detergent, and I did it on a short, gentle cycle, and all the marks are gone. So just so you are aware of that. That didn't take anything extra to get all that marking out. It just they all washed out on their very own in the washing machine. So anyway, back with the finished quilt in a bit. I wanted to get a shot again that shows the quilting a little better, and I finally got some light coming through my window, and I think you can see the quilting pretty well. I always think that the quilting itself adds a lot to the quilt, gives it texture, and makes it just look more inviting. Anyway, I'll be back with a full shot of the finished quilt in a bit.